What's up, my friends? Welcome back to Permission to Shine. It's Andrew Nemani, your host, who gets to interview and bring you guys a front row seat to the most inspiring, humble people from around the world. A quick thank you to our sponsor, Revive Marketing Partners. If you are an Amazon business who's looking to grow your presence, grow your sales on Amazon, reach out to revivemarketingpartners.com. They've got a whole list of their case studies where you'll see thousands of percents of growth month over month because of Revive Marketing Partners. It's an agency that was started by former CPG entrepreneurs who successfully grew and sold their business. So reach out to them at revivemarketingpartners.com. All right, guys, enough of that. Let's dive into today's episode with Dan Nee. He is the founder and CEO of TLDR. It's a tech newsletter that stands for Too Long, Didn't Read. I love the pun on that. They have 5 million active subscribers. It's massive. They're going to be doing 10 million in revenue at least this year. He still owns 100% of the business, which I found to be really enticing. He was able to do that because he formerly started a company called Scraper API. He sold it. The guy is a doer. We're going to talk about how he's able to be such a doer. He's also gone through some tragedy in his life, and he really opens up about that in our conversation in a way that I haven't heard before. So, Dan, thank you for coming on. I freaking respect the heck out of you, and I love to see good people winning. Also have to give him a huge shout out as he's about to be a first-time dad. He is definitely going to be an exceptional father. The last thing, which is very exciting news for me, guys. Sam Parr is an individual who started a podcast called My First Million. It's quite popular. He also started a podcast called MoneyWise, where they bring on these high net worth individuals and they share everything: their net worth, their monthly expenses, what they regret about becoming wealthy. They open up in a way that I've never heard before. I've been a huge listener and fan of the show. And so when Sam invited me to help him host a few podcasts, stoked. And guys, the first episode, hosted by yours truly, Andrew Nemani, just launched. And it would mean the world if you went and checked it out and gave Sam your thoughts. I interviewed somebody who's never done an interview, even despite the fact that he started a $50 billion company. Yes, 50 billion with a B. And he opens up about what it was like, how much he's worth, how he bought a $49 million jet, etc. So check it out on MoneyWise and let Sam know what you think. He's at the Sam Parr, Parr on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and that's MoneyWise Podcast. All right, guys, without further ado, let's get into the incredible Dan Nee. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode of Permission to Shine. We're constantly bringing you some of the best people from across the world. Let's dive in. Thank you, Dan. Enjoy the show, guys. So my audience, who I love dearly, comes from kind of a wide range of spectrums, you could say. And so a lot of them are familiar with TLDR, your amazing child that you've birthed, but some of them aren't. And so can you explain exactly what it is?
TLDR is a newsletter. I started writing it in roughly 2018, and it's essentially just, I think of it as the front page for tech. Sort of like what the front page of the Wall Street Journal is for finance, I think of TLDR as that for technology. I'm a software engineer. That's my background, and so I was essentially just like writing about stuff that I was interested in and like sort of covering news stories that I was interested in. And I had another job at the time, so in the beginning it wasn't like monetized at all. It was just literally just a fun side project. In the last couple of years, it was around 100,000 subscribers, and I was like, wow, that's kind of a lot of people. So so I kind of started a company around it. So now we run 10 newsletters. We have over 5 million subscribers across all the newsletters. It's kind of really blowing up a lot more than I expected.
It's huge, Dan. Congratulations. You're sending this on a daily basis?
Yes. TLDR goes out on a daily basis. The individual vertical newsletters like cybersecurity goes out 3 days a week. It really depends on what the subject matter is and how much news there is.
And you're not writing the original content. You're sourcing a lot of these articles, correct?
Yes, we're sourcing a lot of these articles. I sort of decide what goes in the original TLDR newsletter, and then we have a lot of we've hired a lot of people that work in these big tech companies to sort of help us curate the other vertical newsletters. So, for example, our crypto newsletter is a couple of product people at Coinbase and a crypto founder. Our AI newsletter is three guys. They've all worked at either OpenAI or Google AI. Kind of just hire people that work in the industry day to day, and they know what's interesting and they kind of just curate that for us. The North Star should be like, would I actually send this to my friends in like a group chat? Like the group
Not
chat,
get roasted.
it's undefeated. Yeah, like you can't just like send stuff that's like kind of bullshit or like not interesting or whatever. It's got to be like pretty good to like have that activation energy.
And those people that are sourcing a lot of these links, people that are working at OpenAI and Google, they're on a part-time basis, right?
Yeah, totally. It's for them, it's just a part-time fun hobby or whatever.
It's so cool.
I think it's, I've kind of been really surprised by the kinds of people that we can hire. 10 years ago, I was running a remote company. And at that time, that was like a huge arbitrage. Like nobody was running, there were like very few remote jobs back then, right? And I think the world has kind of changed post-COVID, and remote isn't the sort of arbitrage that it was. But I actually kind of feel the same way about part-time now. Like people love a side hustle. I think that's just like really, really permeated our culture, particularly in the past like 5 years or so. And so like people are like really, really like jazzed to like have a side hustle that pays them like pretty decent money. Even if like at their big tech job, like their hourly rate is just like astronomical. Like people are just really excited about this. And obviously it's like pretty fun because the sort of like background is that this was like a fun side project that I was doing. So I think a lot of that bleeds into the overall ethos of the team too.
And because of that, you now have access to some of the smartest people in the world and get to work with some of the smartest people in the world. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about working in tech is that you get to work with a lot of smart people and they're always building cool things and you get to learn new things just as a product of working in tech, right? Because that's sort of the nature of the industry. It's built on change.
How many full-time employees do you have?
We currently have 20.
Can you share how much you guys do in revenue?
I think this will be our first 8-figure revenue year.
Nice.
Yeah, dude, I'm excited. I'm jazzed.
So let's say if you're doing 10 million in revenue and you've got 20 full-time employees, how is that stacking against people like Morning Brew? Would you say that you're kind of leaner than them or is it similar?
Yeah, I would say that we're leaner, but our product offerings are also like much more focused, right? Like we just run newsletters. Like Morning Brew is, I think they do great stuff. They do. Like social media, they do like podcasts. I think generally most companies will scale sublinearly. Like you will need, if you want to do twice as much stuff, you will need more than twice as many people. I think that's just kind of the nature of the beast. So I don't know that there's like a super fair comparison to companies that are just like, frankly, much bigger than us, right?
I feel like there's a ton of newsletters out in the world to the point where it's kind of become a joke, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I'm starting a newsletter. Yeah, sorry, it's another one.
Totally.
Are you still like, hey, pro, start a newsletter at this point?
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm 1,000%. Obviously, like I do it, so I think.
But like still, so you started yours in 2018. So that's been 6 years.
Yeah.
Do you think that you could start it again today in 2024 and have the same impact and results?
I think when you say it's trendy to start a newsletter, you mean it's trendy for people like you and I. But if you go back to like 2012 or something, like, and you go to these affiliate marketing forums or whatever, like guys just trying to make money selling like, I don't know, diet ebooks or something on the internet. Like they would say stuff like the money's in the list. Like back then newsletters were already super popular in that niche, right? So I think that like really the newsletter phenomena is happening now for people that are like sort of tech and tech adjacent. But honestly, like email is just such a huge, huge market. And I would say like maybe tech newsletters in general are more competitive. If you're starting like maybe a VC newsletter, it's maybe not the best time to start it. But in general, like email is an incredible channel. It's probably, I would say, the most valuable channel relative to any other sort of like form of social media or whatever.
What makes it so much more valuable than the other platforms like Instagram or LinkedIn?
You can't be disintermediated by an algorithm, right? I think that's ultimately the key. It's that you own the audience and like you're speaking directly to them. Whereas, if you're on Twitter or you're on LinkedIn or you're on Instagram or whatever, you're kind of at the mercy of these algorithms, right? And that's kind of what happened to a whole generation of media companies in like the 2010s. I think BuzzFeed is probably the poster child of this, where they drove so much of their traffic by being really, really great at Facebook. And then Facebook kind of just cut them off and changed the algorithm, and the whole thing kind of went bust, right? So I think that a lot of the newer media entrepreneurs kind of saw what happened there and are like, okay, we really need to use like a medium that like can't disintermediate us that easily.
I love that you do. You have total control. And I think we've both lived long enough to see apps come and go where email has been constant. So kudos to you for building such a valuable audience, 5 million deep, especially. I'm curious, do you foresee any new forms of media coming out? Like that's what I think about constantly, right? I'm in such a competitive, saturated market in podcasting, and I'm always thinking about what's the next wave going to look like? How are people going to want to consume their media? Do you have any thoughts there?
That's interesting. I think like probably the most significant change in media in general has been the shift from follower-based platforms to interest-based platforms, where essentially I think like TikTok sort of kicked this off, where they don't really care who you follow, right? For you is just going to be a bunch of stuff they think you'll like, and sort of Facebook and everyone had to follow suit because that just clearly was the dominant paradigm. Now that like AI can generate a lot of this content, I'm interested to see what these companies put into feeds. It's possible that they will follow a lot of the same formats as sort of human generated content, but it's possible that they just develop something completely different. In retrospect, short form video seems like a really obvious form factor, but like nobody was doing that in 2015, right? Like a 10-second video, like what? But I mean, if you look at the way that like AI sort of just like thinks a little bit differently than people, right? Like if you watch an AI play chess, it plays in a qualitatively different way than human grandmasters. They're like much more positional. They're willing to sacrifice a lot of pieces. Like the way that humans play chess, you look at it and it's like, okay, it's kind of logical and like people build on top of like sort of previous lines of play, right? Whereas an AI will just like run a million simulations and then be like, okay, here's this totally new thing. It's not super logical. There was no like evolutionary way to get there, which I think human sort of like intellectual development needs, right? Like you need a way to like build up a system and kind of go from point A to B to C to D. I don't think AI needs that. And so I'm like really excited to see what it comes up with in terms of media, because I think it could come up with something really weird and different, sort of like short form video would have been to somebody like in 2015.
That's well said. I want to back up because I think you have a really interesting personal story. I got to meet your brother and I was talking to him in New York, and he's like, I was trying to convince him to come on the podcast, and he was like, no. You need to talk to my brother. That's the interesting one. And when he said that, I was like, man, that's hard to believe because Alan is a super interesting guy, and I have to thank Alan for connecting us. So let's back up. You grew up in Columbia, Missouri, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Columbia, Missouri.
Dude, what do you think about that? Like when you think of growing up in Columbia, what comes to mind?
I thought it was great. I think if you grew up in like a somewhat reasonable place, you kind of just learn to enjoy the place for what it is. I live in San Francisco now, and when I say I'm from Missouri, people are like, what? Like, where's that? It was not super competitive. Like a lot of my friends grew up in New York or California or whatever, and grew up in hyper competitive places. I don't think we had those competitive pressures, and it kind of let both Alan and I explore a lot more things without too much pressure to sort of focus on any one specialization, right?
I think growing up in the Midwest is one of the most valuable things. And that's where I grew up, right, in Iowa. And it worries me for my future because I don't know if I'll raise my kids, in somewhere like Iowa.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, man, but I got so much from it.
My son is going to be born sometime in December, and he'll probably grow up somewhere in the Bay Area. And I think it'll be a much more competitive place than where I grew up.
What values did your parents have? Because you and your brother are both founders, and so they clearly
Yeah.
did something right. And I'm curious, what kind of parents were they, and what kind of values did they really instill in you guys?
I think as an adult, I actually appreciate my parents a lot more than when I did when I was a kid.
Classic.
Maybe that's something that's common.
I think it is.
You just kind of pick up a lot of things from your parents. My dad's an economics professor, so I think that a lot of the stuff that he talked about kind of gave us maybe a better intuition for business, or at least microeconomics, than most kids have. And we also just kind of always had the sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and our parents just kind of let us run with it, right? Like we like used to buy and sell Magic the Gathering cards online. My parents were always super supportive. Like we would like essentially arbitrage prices for Magic the Gathering cards. As part of that arbitrage, my dad would take the Magic the Gathering cards to the post office and mail them off for free, right? The free courier was actually crucial to the arbitrage working, because after that, there was no margin probably. It just have a lot of schemes. If you give kids room to explore, they'll go like weirdly deep on a lot of things that like you probably won't expect. And I think that we were just given that room to explore, right? Like my parents definitely didn't tell us, hey, you guys should like run this like online business on RuneScape or like buy and sell Magic the Gathering cards. You just kind of see what they fall into and let them run, right? And I think my parents were really, really good at that.
And then where did you go to college?
I went to Yale.
Did you do an undergrad or a graduate program as well?
I actually went to culinary school for a bit after I sold my first company. I went in 2020. So I sold my first company in 2020, and it was kind of just sitting around during COVID, watching a lot of like food YouTube. And I was like, I bet I could do this, And so I was like, I'll sign up for a culinary school. And so I went to culinary school for 6 months. And I got to say, I don't think I could be a chef. Like, I went in with an open mind. I was like, hey, like, let's see what this is. Like, maybe I want to work in the industry or whatever. And after 1 week, I was like, oh my God, like, being a chef is way harder than being a software engineer. Like, this is like, by a lot. Like, it's so much work.
Why was this so hard?
I think you're just running around all the time. My roommate at the time is a chef, and he wears a Whoop, like sort of like health tracker thing, and he runs 15,000 steps a day in the kitchen. Like this is not like
Wow.
15,000 steps. This is like back and forth from like different sets of like stovetops. Maybe I'm just out of shape, but for me it was like very big.
There was a period of time back to Missouri as an adult. Why did you have to do that?
I had these bone growths in my jaw, actually. So I was right out of college. I worked at a place called Jane Street Capital. It's recently become a little more well-known because the FTX guys worked there. But it's even back then, it was like a well-known sort of a quant trading firm. So I worked there right out of college, and then I had these bone growths in my jaw, and I was like, crap. So I had to move back home because I couldn't really like sit up all day and all that sort of stuff. And I ended up spending 6 years in my 20s, from when I was like 23 to when I was 29, living in my parents' basement.
How did that present? So you've got these bones growing in your jaw. Does that show up as pain? You can't talk? What did that look like?
A lot of pain. There were periods where I couldn't eat solid food for like several weeks or a month at a time. And like it was a pretty unpleasant thing.
And then you're home for 6 years. What did that look like? Are you quit your job?
Yeah, I quit my job. Oh my God, I got into so much stuff. I spent almost the whole first year playing online chess, trying to become a chess master. I started falling into these like sort of online business forums and was doing all sorts of like random stuff. I arbitraged like gift cards across gift card exchanges for a while. So like I would buy gift cards on certain exchanges and then sell them on others.
Did you make money on that?
Yeah. Not a lot of money. It was definitely not worth the amount of time and effort that I spent on it. It was just like it was sort of like one of my first forays into just making money, trying to make something happen on the internet. I actually found out that recipes aren't copyrightable. And so I wrote a cookbook, and I learned pay-per-click advertising to like sell the cookbook. I taught myself to program, and I was doing a little freelance web dev. I built a podcast app. At the time, it sucked because it felt like everything just was like either too small, like didn't work or whatever. But now, like when I chat with, a lot of people around Silicon Valley, because now I live in SF, like I have a lot of conversations where people are like, dude, how do you know that? And I was like, dude, I spent like so much time doing this stuff, like we were talking about like gift cards the other day, and with a friend of mine who works in like sort of the credit card points industry, and it's just like, dude, how do you know this about gift cards? It's like, oh man, I was like arbitraging these things back in like 2016 or something. Obviously, like you never want to have that sort of like wandering in the wilderness time when you kind of feel like a loser and like nothing's working, but ultimately, like you do learn a lot from those failures, even if it doesn't feel like they're productive at all at the time.
You are such an incredible doer. It's really inspiring. And I'm curious where that stems from.
I think that I try to consciously do that because it's not my natural inclination. I think a lot of people, myself included, really like to think things out. I have to counter that part of my nature because I think, especially in business, doing is much, much better than thinking. And you should never measure twice and cut once. If anything, you should cut twice and measure once. Like you just get so much more information from putting anything out into the world versus thinking about it, that you should spend almost all of your time just doing stuff. For people that like are sort of starting on like their entrepreneurial journey or whatever, a lot of, and I'm sure you know this, like having started a podcast, the default isn't that like you put out something and people are like, oh, this sucks. The default is you put something out and nobody pays attention, right? Like nobody listens, nobody reads. Like that's really what happens, right? What you're trying to do is make something that's like helping somebody in a way that it will overcome that sort of initial energy needed for them to actually pay attention to you. Really, you're just trying to maximize reasonable shots on goal rather than to like plan out a master plan in the beginning and then sort of execute on that plan.
When you moved home, did you think you'd be there for 3 months, or did you think you'd be there for 3 years?
I didn't think I would be there for that long. That's why I spent the whole first year playing online chess. I was like, well, I'm just going to go right back to Wall Street and like, it'll be hunky dory, And then eventually I was like, wow, this is like really lasting a lot longer than I thought it would. And so like, I better like figure out like a backup plan, because I don't know if I'm just like going to go back and get my old job and do the whole thing.
And when you think about that special time period of being in your 20s and living in your parents' basement for 6 years, what do you take away from it most?
I think that doing stuff doing is better than thinking is the number one takeaway. And then probably the second takeaway would be that it's kind of weird how much the extremely specific internet echo chambers that you fall into affect your life. And I know that like internet echo chamber kind of has like a negative connotation. A lot of people talk about it in the context of politics or whatever, but there are actually like many, many like extremely positive like micro communities on the internet that can, like, if you just kind of fall into them, make a huge positive impact on your life, right? In high school, like I used to be on this forum called College Confidential, and it like helped me figure out how to get into college. And then in college, I was on this forum called Wall Street Oasis, trying to get a job on Wall Street. And then, when I was spending a lot of time in my 20s in my parents' basement, I would, spend a lot of time on like startup forums, like Hacker News and, tech and VC Twitter or whatever. And I would read a lot of these blog posts by like, Paul Graham or whatever. If you are lucky enough to fall into the right micro community on the internet, it can really propel your life in weird ways. Finding like a really positive part of the internet to influence your life was very surprising to me.
Results show for sure. What's been the hardest part of building TLDR?
Learning how industry works. That's very different from the industries that I've been a part of. Like media is just very, very different than, tech and finance, right? Like a lot of these, like for example, a lot of advertising budgets are controlled by ad agencies. I've never set foot in an ad agency. Like I have no idea like how people in ad agencies like talk. Like I've seen a few episodes of Mad Men, but that's pretty much it, right? Like, so I think that that's actually something that happens to a lot of founders in sort of the the Silicon Valley sphere where, they fall into something that like, it's like, oh, this seems to be working, but you're serving a customer that like you in many cases have never met, right? Like one of the curators of our founders newsletter writes software for construction subcontractors. It's a super random industry, and you kind of just like, I think the challenging part is like you just have to learn this entire new world while you're building a team internally that's like culturally like very different from the external world that you serve it, right?
What makes you most proud of everything that you've done on TLDR?
We get a lot of positive feedback from readers, which is extremely gratifying.
People freaking love you guys.
Thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, my first business was a SaaS business called Scraper API. It's a API for developers to build web scrapers. And it turns out when you run a SaaS business, nobody ever emails you to say you're doing a great job. Like never. Like in the history of Scraper API, nobody ever emailed us to say like you're doing great. It's always, oh, like your dashboard is slow, your API is down, whatever it is, right? Like it's nobody emails you to say you're doing a great job. So I think like one of the happy learnings from running TLDR is like, oh, like people really, really enjoy this thing. And I think the dynamic is very different from like a reader to a sort of like SaaS customer. Honestly, it makes it much more motivating to work on.
I love that.
I'm sure you get this too, right? Like I'm sure you get a lot of listeners to your podcast that write in saying like, hey, this is amazing. And that's really an awesome feeling that I think that like it's probably easy to take for granted if you're in media, but it really, really doesn't happen in most businesses. Like
yes,
people actually write in to say you're doing a good job.
Yeah, the feedback loop is cool. I think my previous career was AI for colon cancer detection. And so there was a feedback loop in that because you'd actually be sitting in the cases when the AI would pick up on a polyp and the doctor would be like, hey, I wouldn't have seen that without the AI. And so that was always a pretty powerful moment because that's actually a life saved. And now a lot of times with permission to shine, it's a listener writing in saying, hey, I listened to Dr. Sanjeev Chopra about, living your purpose. And because of that, like I'm switching careers, you're like, man, that's a big decision, right? And because it's true, man. It's like, if we get 80 years on Earth, that's like such a short period of time, man. And like, I just want to be on my deathbed someday and be really proud of the decisions I made, especially the hard ones.
Totally. I think that like one of the big changes that 22-year-old would be surprised, a 22-year-old Dan would be surprised by is, I think the degree to which I care about the things that my company is doing. Which is weird to say, but like I was a quant trader out of college, and that's like pretty explicitly like we just use money to make more money, and like, and it was super fun because it's kind of like playing a video game, and you're not hurting anyone, so it's like great, so like I think 22-year-old me was super happy with that, but I think now just like seeing the sort of like impact that TLDR has, where like a lot of people just like love to start their day with TLDR, that's like really gratifying to me, and something that like I really value.
And for the people who make it into TLDR, it's such a mama I made it moment.
I love that. Yeah, I honestly think like that should be like a bit of a North Star for the company, to like build the level of legitimacy where people just like see, oh my God, we're in TLDR, and like yeah, and say, Mama, we made it.
Let's go. How do we get this podcast in TLDR?
Oh, we'll make it. We'll make it happen. We'll make it happen.
Mama, I made it.
Mama, I made it. I love it.
How old are you?
I am 34. I'm so old I have to pause before I say
no. Dude, you've done so much for a 34-year-old. I feel like you've lived like 3 lifetimes already.
It's hard to benchmark that. I feel like I've done a lot, but I feel like most 34-year-olds probably feel like they've done a lot of things, right? So I don't know.
I don't know, man. I feel fortunate to talk to a lot of people, and I feel like you've done an extreme amount for where you're at. I'm curious what you kind of, when you think about what you want to accomplish moving forward, whether it's personally for you, Dan, or TLDR, or both, what are those things?
I want to build a company that I want to work at. I think my first company was not that. It was, B2B SaaS, like you kind of grind it out and it makes good money, and that's great. And TLDR, like the origin being like a side project that I just was working on for fun, is sort of super core to the project even today. I would say that like if we can accomplish that, like if I'm like at TLDR and I'm happy to be here and the employees are happy to work here and the readers are happy with what we're doing, um, the rest almost doesn't even matter.
It almost sounds so simple.
Yeah, it's surprisingly like it's easy to say, but it's very tough to make a company that like people actually enjoy working at. I think it requires a lot of different considerations. Like you need a business model that's high margin enough to really treat your employees well. You need to you need to have like a subject matter that's like reasonably interesting. I think it's like probably pretty hard in a lot of these like extremely B2B sort of like service niches to like create like a fun culture or like have people be super interested in working on the thing. Um, but yeah, I think that that is sort of like a good North Star for the company that I'm running at this point in my life.
For the people that know you best, how do you think that they would classify you? If I was like, hey, what's Dan like? What would they say?
I would say chill and fun would probably be the two biggest like words in that word cloud. I honestly just like don't take things too seriously. I'm not like very type A at all. And I think that like a lot of those sorts of parts of myself I have to override a little bit to be a good leader and founder. Um but yeah, generally the people that know me best would say that happy and chill are probably like the two like two of happy, chill, fun, like those sorts of vibes, I guess. Like a lot of people always think I'm from Hawaii for some reason. Maybe that's like the best way to describe this actually. I
That's
feel like I
so
get that an
perfect.
abnormal amount. They're like, "Are you from
Yes.
Hawaii?" And I'm like, "No." They're like, "Oh, you seem like Hawaiian or something."
Wait, so
Um,
what makes you unchill?
Nobody's just like a good founder, I think, out of the womb. Like there are like always going to be like parts of your personality that you have to like kind of override. I think that like for me, like I naturally tried to avoid hard conversations. Um like I'm just like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm not just not even gonna worry about that. That's kind of always been how I am. But I think like in a business, when you avoid those hard conversations, you just end up letting problems fester, right? And if somebody's underperforming and it's actually worse for them in the long term if you avoid the conversation and you just let them keep underperforming because that just takes away their opportunity to improve, right? And even if you like lay say you like if like something goes badly wrong and you have to lay someone off, someone who's like a low performer at your company might be a good performer at another company, right? It just might not be the best fit. So like if you're not having the tough conversations, you're all you're really doing is just taking away somebody's chance to improve and hiding that information from them, right? And so that's kind of how I think about forcing myself to have these hard conversations when like things aren't going well in the people problems of business, which, you know, there's that like sort of famous quote, all problems are people problems in any business. And I think it's like generally true. Um, so I think that that's like probably something that's like pretty against my nature. And so I have to like very consciously like fight against that inclination.
And are you doing a better job of that?
I think so. I think actually something that really helped us in wedding planning, because like there are so many things. It's kind of funny to say that like you learned a lot about business in wedding planning, but you know there are just like so many vendors, like whatever. Like everybody has their own opinions. Like you have to say no a lot. Um, like and so like I kind of just really built up that muscle over the course of like 6 months of pretty intense wedding planning. And I was like, wow, this is great. Like now I really apply this in my sort of work life.
I love drawing inspiration from the most random things.
It's honestly so random, but you know, like if somebody's trying to charge you $8 a person for a napkin, you gotta lay down the law.
Hell yeah. Are there daily things that are really foundational to you and your success?
I wouldn't say there's anything that's foundational to my success in like my daily habits. I think that I kind of just try to follow best practices. You know, I try to have a green smoothie every morning and get a little bit of exercise in. There's nothing crazy there. I kind of think that like I broadly think that thinking from first principles is, I know it's super in fashion right now. And um, I actually think that like thinking from first principles and sort of designing these things yourself is kind of to decision making what like active investing is to personal finance. Like, like if you actually have like domain expertise in like health or whatever, and like you have reason to believe that you have like an edge on like what other people are doing, you should design, by all means, design your own, right? Like if you're Andrew Huberman or whatever, like you know all the stuff, like you can design like a better morning routine. But honestly, like index funds are really great, and indexing on like what smart people think on subjects that you don't know a lot about. Like for me, that's like probably health and sleep and all this sort of stuff, like daily routines. Um, Indexing on what smart people think is awesome. And like thinking from first principles, like you shouldn't do that everywhere in your life, you know? Like, and so for me, like when I look at like these sort of health things and like habits and all that sort of stuff, I kind of just see what smart people do. And I'm like, I'll try to 80/20 this. I'll like do like a green protein shake, and I'll try to sleep at a normal time, and I'll get in a little bit of cardio and weights every day. That's like pretty much it. There's nothing too crazy that I do there.
I think that speaks volumes. And just being able to do that consistently is the best thing, rather than going like all in and super crazy for like 3 weeks and then burning out and then you never do it again.
Oh, totally. And like, don't get me wrong. This is like not like I have not always been this. Like, I was keto for 2 years. I was like doing crazy stuff. Oh, but I think that like now I'm just like, you know, like let's just do the basics and do the basics well. And I think that like sort of sentiment is like surprisingly powerful in almost every domain. Like doing the basics well.
What was keto like for 2 years?
It's you learn a lot about what foods have like 2 grams of sugar versus don't. Oh,
Would you state like 30 grams, 25 grams? What's the threshold
under 20
again?
grams. Under 20 grams. Oh,
Cutthroat, man.
yeah, yeah. It was it's very much a diet for dudes in their 20s. It's like I would eat a like a pound of bacon and like a big plate of spinach for dinner all the time. Like that's the kind of thing like that might kill you if you're like 40 or 50. But,
Yes.
like like for a 20-year-old dude, like you're kind of invincible anyways, so just do the weird stuff then.
Once
For
you start
me,
burning those ketones, though, isn't it crazy the energy that you get?
oh, it's wild. It's a very weird feeling. Like I honestly like recommend people try it once. I think it's kind of fun and weird. If you told me that that's like the healthiest way to live your life over the course of like 80 years, I would be like pretty surprised.
Definitely.
Like a lot of it seems like a little bit questionable.
I think the green smoothies are probably a safer bet, especially as you bring a child into the world.
Yeah, probably a safer bet. Probably
Yeah.
probably can't be housing like a pound of bacon and bacon for dinner.
Yeah, man. Honestly, there's nothing I love more in this world than seeing good people succeed. I feel like I see so many people who are just idolized, a lot of like rappers, I see somebody like Travis Scott and people idolize him. And it's like,
Yeah,
is he really a good human? From the stories I hear, no. And so when there's
probably
people
not.
like Dan Nee who are like winning and doing incredible work in the world and they're actually good people, I think there's nothing cooler. And so thank you, man, for using your platform for good. I mean, you have so much insight. And so for you to take the time to share that, I think means a lot to the listener and to me for sure.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate that.
Yeah,
And this is awesome. I'm really excited to hear this.
thank you, man.